Teamwork isn't just nice to have in business, it's the undisputed competitive advantage. When your team members work as a unified force, your whole operation benefits through higher productivity, thriving creativity, and unstoppable momentum. Welcome to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast, where we share with you strategies and tactics to help you develop game-changing teams so that you and your business can make a real difference in the world.
So welcome everyone to this week's edition of Impactful Teamwork. My name's Julia Felton and I'm your host again this week. And I just want to kick off today with a quote from my guest, which is, "The leaders of today should not be the leaders of tomorrow. A more balanced, holistic, inclusive, ecologically minded style of leadership will be more powerful in the future, one which prioritizes our collective well-being above all else." So my guest today is Maria Brink, and Maria is the founder and president of Zynergy International. She's a leadership consultant, corporate coach, and speaker. And like me, she is passionate about changing the way that we lead businesses. So Maria, so welcome to the podcast today. I'm so happy to have you here.
Julia, I'm honored to be here. Couldn't be more excited.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think there is so many things we're going to talk about today, because you and I have been just talking off air, and we're so on the same page about so many things that we want to waken the world up to the way that we need to lead better. Absolutely. Let's just kick off with, let's talk a little bit about leadership culture, because I always like to look at the container and the environment. And I know that you've talked in your book, and we'll talk about your book a little bit later on, that leadership culture hasn't evolved for like 10,000 years and it's actually killing business. Tell us a little bit more about what your thoughts are and how you came to that and how that's showing up in business.
Yeah, as we've talked a little bit about before the show, obviously straight out of my book, The Leadership We Need, is a chapter on the old traditional leadership compared to the modern leadership and what we need, in my opinion, and it sounds like in your opinion as well, forward and have a bright future. And it really starts with having the right mindset. And I would like to question the mindset that runs business and governments, nations today. And since maybe we want to focus on business in this particular podcast, I'll be happy to do that. But it goes to a fundamental shift that I see needed in our mindset at so many levels. And if we go back to culture and 10,000 years of kind of the same mindset, what I'm really speaking to, and I know you read a little bit about in the book, is that it seems to me that we're stuck in a subconscious bias, if you will, of who we find qualified and capable to lead. And it's not necessarily the leader that have our best intentions in mind and also does not have a long-term inclusive balance type of leadership. What we tend to go for is probably out of survival back hundreds of thousands of years ago. We might have needed it for survival. Is a very aggressive, dominant, I would even call it hyper-masculine type of personality. Man or woman, but as we've seen for the most part, pretty masculine and men-dominated. I would say 10,000 years have been pretty much monopolized by men and this hyper-masculinity. And of course, one of my questions in the book is, how well is it truly serving us? And I even make the comparison to an subconscious desire and the want we have for sugar and fat. Once was crucial for our survival when we didn't know where our next calories were going to come from. But today we know, especially around the holidays, right? My goodness, it doesn't create well-being in our lives. It even leads to disease and early death. And it just doesn't make us feel good. And it's not good for us. And I would compare it to the desire for this highly aggressive, dominant status and power desire that we see in our leaders, and how it's not serving for the rest of us. And it's really a very ego and self-centered type of leadership that might have been great when we had our barbarians at the gate.
Yeah.
We wanted to protect their tribe, and we needed that alpha pumping their chest. But really today, our issues in business and nations, but in business, are more complex. They need more of a complex kind of mindset to deal with them. It needs system thinking. And I can go on and on, but it was a long answer to the question. But
No,
yeah.
that's great because I think it's really interesting, isn't it? It's like we're always doing what we've always done. And
Exactly.
that good
It's
old
not a comforting being isn't it?
yeah. So what
Yeah.
kind of mindset shifts do you think that we need to be making that can really
Yeah.
help us create this sustainable future? I know you allude to, I think maybe it's 7 in your book or something like that. So just share some of those with us,
Yeah.
what we can do.
Yeah. So there's 7 in the book. I could even say 10 to be exact, but they fall under 3 pillars. So I think it'd be interesting for our audience to hear the 3 pillars, kind of high level. Number 1, the first pillar is really about bringing in a full set of leading humanity. So we need to get out of break up the leadership monopoly, if you will, and bringing women, minorities, indigenous people, bring voices to people that never had a voice before in leadership. That's going to be crucial. Just we talked before the podcast or before the show was recorded about the importance of nature and animals and how we all depend on our survival together. And bringing in the indigenous population, they make up 5% of the world population and they sit on 80% of our ecosystem or biodiversity. And as we've killed off 70% of our biodiversity since 1970, the way business is conducted, imagine the importance and the wisdom that they carry, the stewardship that we can really learn from in business and in the Western world. We absolutely need to get their voice into the conversation, into leadership, and into power positions if we are going to have a bright future. So that's number 1. Number 2 is about widening our circles of connection. What do I mean by that? But it's really about going from me and the ego, as we're seeing playing out in the world today, leaders, right? At the best, there might be their families included at best. We cannot even look to our own nations anymore. We really need to become global citizens and even take it wider, include animals, all animals, insects, ecosystems. And I would even like to see, and maybe this is a stretch for some people, but I would even like to see a true respect for the generations that came before us to understand what they went through to get you and I to where we're at today and show some gratitude and also responsibility for the future generations yet to come and not minimize their importance in life, but it's truly compared to ours, even though they're not here yet. I think that's important to include. And then number 3 of the 3 pillars would be the inner balance between our masculine and feminine leadership traits. So we need to be daring, but we also need to be cautious. We need to be aggressive yet timid, right? We need to be bold and humble. And we need to have that balance, decisive, inclusive, confident, caring. And so we know how to balance that and how to show up in the situation in our best way, depending on who we're talking to, what the situation requires of us. But we cannot just be daring, egocentric, and aggressive, which is what we're seeing in most leaders in the world today. It's just not serving us anymore. So those are the 3 pillars. Again, a long answer, and I can break it down however you want, and if you want to stay there, but high level. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is very interesting, actually. I'll just pick up on that last one, first of all, the inner balance between the masculine and feminine, because there's such paradoxes, right? They're the opposite sides of a coin, right? We want boldness and humility. And that's challenging, right? Because we know that even if we just look at different personality styles, it's like we want you 1 minute to be extrovert and the next minute to be introvert. And we know that people just naturally fall at different points along the spectrum, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess what I'm hearing there is this is requiring leaders to be really adaptive and really flexible, but also really empathetic and have a lot of emotional intelligence in order to read the situation, to almost know which hat they need to put on at what time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. They need a wider toolkit. And I think one thing that I think is interesting, and I agree with you, we all obviously have natural strengths And we don't want to shy away from those.
No.
And there's nothing, they all are gifts. But we also want to try on, to your point, different hats at different times. What's interesting with their strengths is often, depending what those strengths are and what kind of culture we grew up with and in, some are going to be more valued than others. And I think like in corporate America, of course, since we're talking about business, if you're assertive, decisive, confident, bold, that's more highly valued and incentivized versus being more possibly caring and inclusive and humble, right? So it's important that we start also to value those other qualities and traits that we have, because I would argue that the reason we're seeing this decisiveness and even overconfident is because it's overly valued. And we might have more strengths and tools in our toolkit than we might even realize, but we molded, in particular in corporate America, and I'm sure it's the same in England, to play the same tune over and over again. And I think it's just more to us than we even know ourselves. And it could even be the reason why people feel burned out, they feel lost at work, they don't feel a lot of meaning. Maybe it's because they truly cannot bring their true self to work, but we all have to play the same tune, and it's getting really old, and it really, truly is not serving us or the business.
Yeah. And I guess what would be really interesting, I've been digging into a lot about AI recently and AI in the workplace.
Yeah,
And
I heard it last.
yeah,
It was
yeah. And it will be interesting to see, because where a lot of those kind of get stuff done, particularly the repetitive type stuff, is going to ultimately be done by AI. We're going to need this human touch in business more than ever, and more human connection. And it seems to me that the leaders that are the sort of aggressive, they alienate their team members, they don't get their team members on board. Actually, we might just find that naturally they aren't so successful going forward, because the skills that we need in business are now very different than the skills we needed even 10 years ago to be successful. And maybe that might naturally, things might naturally change that way because of that. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But
I've been thinking and exactly in the same patterns where I see AI now being the task-oriented, linear tool that we have that's been historically the traits that have been valued the most, and now they can be replaced by AI. So all of a sudden, the human touch and the feminine traits in all of us becomes more interesting and more important, and kind of what AI just can't do quite yet. That is, who knows? But and how that is going to be your competitive advantage. Absolutely.
Yeah, no,
absolutely. And I think it's fascinating that I believe that's the trend that's going to happen. And I couldn't be more excited. That is hopefully some of the positive things coming out of AI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm really excited about the future of AI and what it brings, because I think it does mean that we are going to have to see more compassion, more empathy, more critical thinking, more adaptability out of leaders. And these are all skills that if you went on a leadership training course, even 5, maybe even 10 years ago, we weren't talking about these things. We were always talking about the actual skills that people needed, rather than one of my other podcast episodes I talk about, and I hate the term softer skills, which was renamed meta skills, that how these are becoming more and more important for leaders, because business it's always been about relationships. In the old days, it was, I remember when I was even at school and watching my dad go to work, it was all the old boy network, right?
The old boys clubs. They'll do pretty well.
So it's interesting how we've seen an evolution of that. But whatever way it happens, relationships are still at the core of that. And relationships are what are going to make everything successful.
I agree. My only concern with AI is that it seems to me that in the development and the design, if you will, and development and implementation of AI, we still have a very narrow mindset. Going back to that mindset and the leadership mindset that I see we need to change. because we still have mostly younger men, a little bit maybe of a hot-headed, want to make possibly a name for themselves, money-driven, testosterone, want to crack the code, right? Do we truly have a mindset in the design, in the development, and in the implementation of AI where it will be safe for the future? Are we bringing in voices that are needed? Are we bringing in voices that understand the possible consequences on nature? We know it takes up a lot of energy and water. And do we really have that luxury going forward? And so it's still, I question the mindset. And of course, now they're putting it out, oh, we should use it responsibly. Why do we always put it on the end user? Why don't we put in the responsibility into early on in the design, right, of this technology? And of course, we're seeing, I believe, don't quote me on this, but I think the spending on cracking the code to get to the next generation of AI, I think, outspent the security or the safety of AI about 20 times.
Wow.
So there you go. You see what's being valued and how it's possibly be used. And I, unfortunately, on that side of AI, I'm not as optimistic.
Yeah. And I guess
Yeah.
this all talks to the second pillar you were talking about, which is widening the circle of connection, right? Is making sure that we've got enough different voices in there. And you and I both know about the value of having people with different strengths, but importantly, different perspectives. Otherwise, we build a business that is very mono, goes down one way. And we know, and we've talked about this in the podcast before, about you tend to hire people like you. You know, it's very easy to build an organization with all mini clones of you. But then you've all got the same skill set, you're all going the same way, and there's all these massive holes in the business. And therefore, the need to have people with not only different skills, but different lens on seeing things is so important, because our users are multiple people. I'm working with a startup company at the moment, and this is one of the things we've been talking about. The user experience is so important, whether that user experience is a team member within the organization or your physical end users and stakeholders of a product or service. We've all got to be able to step into their shoes and how do they see it? And in a former role, I was designing tech in my corporate role. And that was one of the things. It's all of a sudden having to go, okay, now I'm looking at this piece of technology I've designed through the lens of one of my customers. What do they need? What do my team members need? You've got all these different views, and that we've got to remember that's exactly the same with everything we do. We've got to get multiple perspectives on things.
And I love, Julia, what you said there also about how we hire people just like ourselves. Now, that is actually another unconscious bias that we have that probably served us back in the days where it was that safety around that. But really today, in this world, we really need to think beyond and include and invite people that look very differently from ourselves. It goes back to that craving for fat and sugar, craving for aggressive leadership and alpha males, inviting and including only people that look like ourselves. Today, those are barriers. Today, those are liabilities. And what we need more than ever is a diversity of thought. And to your point, different perspectives. And I just love that you pointed that out. Yes. And it's in that playbook. Playbook.
I think the big challenge with unconscious bias, and maybe you have experienced this too, is the problem is you don't know you've got it, right? And that because it's unconscious bias, it's in the name. And I'll share a very personal story from corporate. When I first started in corporate and I became a manager of a team, and I was hiring my first hire into the business. And I was working in accountancy firms, even though I wasn't an accountant. But my idea of the uniform for success was, for a gentleman, was a navy or grey pinstripe suit, because that's what my dad wore every single day when he got on the train to go to London. So I'm interviewing, and I've had these CVs and I've reviewed them, and I've got some amazing CVs coming up, and I go out to meet this gentleman and I've looked at his CV, it's like, this will be amazing. And he's wearing a plum coloured suit. And in that moment, I couldn't hire him. Now, I didn't know about unconscious bias back then. Early on in my career, I'd never even heard of these terms. But I remember it was the most painful 45-minute interview, because in my mind, I was like, I just can't take you seriously. The colour of your suit is all wrong. And I think this is part of the problem that we've got around mindset is people don't actually know they've got it because the unconscious bias we pick up prior to the age of 7 when we're growing up. It's what we see in our early years, and it's the programming that's gone in. You don't even know until
Exactly. And I actually listened to that episode. That fabulous. Exactly. I love that. It- it's crazy how much it holds us back without us even knowing it and the price of that. So thanks for bringing that to the forefront and giving a perfect example of how that actually looks like in reality.
And I think this is our job, isn't it? Is to make people aware that we do have these unconscious bias going on in leadership, in business, and there is a different way to do things. But until people become aware of it by people like you and me talking about stuff like this, they don't know what they don't know.
And we all have it. It's not like somebody has it and somebody doesn't. We all are fighting these, and we all are working on progress on these. So there's no point in shaming anybody or make somebody feel like worse than any, or we're on this together, but we need to bring awareness to it, to your point, and talking about it is definitely helping and come up with some tools on how to get less of it. Because it truly is on so many levels.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I just wanted to change tack for a minute because I know there's something I always love it when I read books and I learn something. So you talk in your book about a polycrisis. So perhaps you could explain, because I'd never even heard of this term before. What is a polycrisis? What's going on and what can we learn from this? What do we need to be aware of around this?
Yes. To start might be interesting for your audience to hear my thoughts on why we are in a polycrisis and then what it is.
Yeah.
So why I believe we are in a polycrisis is actually a direct effect of 10,000 years of monopolized leadership and decision making, where we've had these hyper-masculine men. I can give you the numbers on what we're seeing in today, and it's still monopolized by men, top positions, business, nations, all world religions. I can go on and on, but directly causing the polycrisis we're in, because that kind of mindset is just not serving us. It doesn't bring out a long-term perspective like we talked about before the show. It doesn't include the well-being of all the people. It doesn't include fairness. It doesn't have a component of too much compassion and caring for people or animals or nature, et cetera, et cetera. So that, I believe, is direct cause of our polycrisis that we're seeing in the world today. And what is the polycrisis? The polycrisis is, and it's a term also you might have hear the term metacrisis, polycrisis, metacrisis, same thing. It's truly a crisis that we have on so many levels. One of the most talked about is obviously climate change. We know we have the science, we have the data. There's no debate that we're in a climate change crisis, and we're currently in it because we already have millions of people suffering from it around the world. Right here in Colorado, we have wildfires. They're out of control. I was just in communication with the local chief here, and they do not train the type of fires that we're seeing today. So this is not political. It's just a true fact. And anybody who is paying attention to our weather, we can tell it's more and more extreme. When it snows more, when it's a drought and no snow, it gets really dry. When it's windy, it becomes more and more windy. We've been without electricity here in Boulder, Colorado, on and off in December, which is just not normal. I was even worried about this podcast because I thought if the electricity goes out, that would not be good.
No,
Since I'm here. So that's one of them. We also have, speaking of AI, we don't really have international regulations and policies on AI yet. And I think that is a crisis waiting to happen in itself. We also have very limited, if possibly none, regulation on biotechnology and what we can do with DNA editing and et cetera, et cetera. That is a crisis in itself. We have an escalating nuclear threat happening, and obviously that's a crisis. And then we have the crisis we've had for a long time being wars. The fact that we have wars today, really, it's mind-boggling. How have we not evolved and got further to understand we really can do better than this? And those are some of the crises. And then, of course, we still have poverty. The fact that we have poverty and children dying of diseases that we can treat is also mind-boggling. So we have all of these, and it's actually by choice and design. It's not like we need to have it this way. And that goes back to that monopolized mindset that it's not serving us. And it goes back to my direct blaming, if you will, this monopoly, because we all know that monopoly is rarely a good thing.
Yeah.
And here we are. Yeah. So should we be surprised? No. And then, Julia, we hear things like, oh, Maria, you're being so naive. We've always had wars and we'll have wars, and it's just human nature. Is it really? Is that really our human nature? No. That is the nature of these type of leaders that led us through history and are in the history books and are names that we all know that rarely did a good thing for humanity. We have a few exceptions, Mandela, Gandhi, Mother Teresa, of course, but they're few and far between. And we need more of those kind of leaders if we are to have a bright future. So it's not human nature. And the fact that we never had that feminine valued and incentivized in leadership, and the fact that we never had women valued in leadership, shows that half of humanity is not even included in leadership and in the humanity that we see in the world and the decisions that being made of going to war, et cetera, instead of creating alliances and relationships, and that we're all in this together. So it's not human nature. It's a hypermasculine nature of men nature, not human nature. Yeah.
And it's really interesting, isn't it, actually, when we actually look to nature and the animal kingdom. I'm thinking actually about the herds of horses at the moment. They really have understood the importance of sharing the leadership. In a herd of horses, the leadership is shared between the lead mare and the lead stallion, right? So there's that, you get that balance of masculine and feminine energy. And everyone, when we're talking about masculine and feminine energy, that isn't necessarily gender specific, as in women can be highly masculine in their energy and gentlemen can be highly feminine in their energy. So it's not a gender. And I think a lot of people get a bit confused about that. That's why I just wanted to highlight that to everyone listening, that we're not having a pop at men here. It's the energy of the leader.
No, different terms. Exactly. I wish we had some different terms. Sometimes let's say linear and non-linear, but I don't even know if that's so, but I agree with you. Is that about genders specifically? No.
Yeah. And so I think this need for, perhaps it is that we have to move towards this model of shared leadership where, because we know that no one leader can know everything nowadays. There are days the factory manager did know everything in those days. But nowadays we're just inundated with information, and everyone is so empowered to know whatever they want to know. Anyone can go, that's got a computer access anyway, can go onto the internet and find out stuff. In the old days, that knowledge was power. It's not really power anymore. The power comes actually from taking the knowledge and doing something actionable and useful with it in the workplace, even in life.
But about horses and animals and how we can learn from their type of leadership, that reminds me, as you also read in the book, about my time in Congo and working with chimpanzee. Because what's fascinating, if you look at chimpanzees, so we separated from chimpanzees and now, of course, I don't have it on top of my head, I would say probably about 4 million years ago. Maybe it was 2 to 4 million years ago. Chimpanzees also developed a highly aggressive alpha male type of leadership for their community. And it's still the type of leadership in chimps today. And I saw it, of course, firsthand in Cameroon when I got to live and work with them. What's interesting is that they also create wars between tribes, and they are also even, and as Jane Goodall was so sad to see, but they even kill each other. So they have that leadership just like humans do. What's interesting is that there are also other close cousin is the bonobos. And bonobos for a long time, people would consider them being chimps as well, but they actually they're a little bit smaller and then they're darker. You could see the difference of chimps pretty well. They developed a very different leadership style. And it was by leadership being a group of females. And today they live in peaceful communities. And when they run into another tribe, they actually even share food and collaborate. And yes, you can just see the stark difference here in type of leadership. And we all have survived. I think that's a very important point. They weren't leading from a naive kind of trait and flowers and bees, and this is not the real world. No, they were also surviving and doing great today. I would actually even say they do much better than the alpha male type leadership that we're seeing in chimps. So there's a perfect example. And I'm not saying we need to go into all feminine and female in groups and all that, but I'm saying, boy, can we learn from that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that you had the opportunity to be there with the gorillas. I actually got to Uganda and saw the gorillas, but not peering over trees to try and see them out there. And it was fascinating. Are there any other leadership lessons that you brought back from the Congo that you'd like to share with people?
Absolutely. We started the podcast with the importance of the indigenous population
Yeah.
and bring their voice in. Not only do they have, in my opinion, the absolute right perspective, they see nature, all animals, ecosystem, insects, all of it. We're all in one big extended family. And I think that is so beautiful to have that perspective because we're truly one. And I think we should bring that into business and hold that presence and that perspective. They also obviously have very different type of meetings. They don't have the alpha male, if you will, coming in very bold and decisive and confident and speaking to his new idea and everybody, yes, sir, that sounds great. Yes, that sounds great. No, they have more of a sitting in a community circle with all the community members speaking and the chief usually speaking last, making sure everybody feels seen and heard, which will be very nice. And obviously bring in that diversity of thought, if you will. So there's a lot we can learn from there as well. Just a very different, more slow pace, taking the time and seeing people for who they are and taking a lot of time to listen to them would be nice to see in the corporate boardrooms.
Yeah. And I think the thing that I've observed from the indigenous populations is that they live in the present. They have slowed down because they're in the moment. They're paying attention to everything that's going on around them. Now, part of that is a survival mechanism because I know when I went to live in the African bush, if you're not paying attention, you might be some lion's dinner the next moment. You've got to pay attention. And I think the indigenous populations that live out in nature, they're really tuned in. They've got to live in the moment to what's going on. And therefore, by doing that, you are more present, you're more grounded, you have the opportunity to really hear what other people are saying to you rather than so many times people have conversations, but they don't really hear what's happened and what was said to them. Yeah. And they're just a lot more intuitive, I think, because they're really listening and paying attention to the whole, themselves, the environment and everything around them. And I think there's so much as leaders that we can learn about that power of slowing down to speed up and just being in the moment. And then we don't have to steamroll through things because actually when you're in the moment, you've got all the time in the world.
That exactly. And I would even add to that one more thing that I'm sure you point to is that when you have this perspective of the extended family and you have a respect for the generations that came before you and the responsibility for future generations, it also creates this amazing sense of belonging because you're part of that. And I think that connection and sense of belonging gives you so much meaning in the moment. And I think it's something that is truly missing in our Western world and maybe more so in the corporate Western world. And something I know from being in the corporate environment, I felt, what's the point? There's no meaning here. Why am I doing this job just for a quota? I was in sales and I thought, and that's when I quit my job and moved to Cameroon. It's because I was I felt lost and I did find it. It's the connection that I didn't have. And I didn't have the connection to the larger understanding of the world, which they have obviously naturally. And I love that. So that's something else that I've probably felt that is a true gift for us that since we don't have that sense in our everyday lives.
Yeah. And I think particularly since COVID, this whole need of belonging and connection has just become really heightened for people because people didn't know they needed it until people got really isolated and they're like, oh, wow, this isn't a good feeling. And so I think belonging is a massive thing that everyone is really striving for. And that sense of belonging, because everybody's going so fast. I always say we're more connected. We've got more social media friends than ever before, and we're more disconnected than ever before. Because this notion of connection is flimsy, that we think, oh, we've got all these friends, it's great, but they're not the people that have got your back, you know.
True connection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where we've got to slow down, because everyone's been going so fast that we haven't invested in to go back to where we started, in the relationships and that. And therefore we don't have that sense of belonging. And so I think as leaders as well, we need to create that sense of belonging. I love that in the horse herds they're all about health, harmony, and unity. That's what their mission is. They want to keep everyone together. And that's what, as leaders, we need to create that health, harmony, and unity in the workplace. And that comes through that sense of belonging for people. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you definitely don't have to go to Africa for that. It's all around. So all of this that you and I are talking about, even though we brought Africa in because maybe that was the aha moment for us, but the reality is all around us every day.
Yeah.
Just like we have the feminine and the masculine leadership traits in all of us. And it's just, to your point, it's a question of slowing down and becoming aware and start valuing it. Yes.
Yeah. Maria, as we bring this to a close, do you want to tell people a little about your book, how they can get it, how they can get in contact with you? Because I'm loving your book.
Yeah. The book, The Leadership We Need, A New Mindset for a Brighter Future, it just came out end of last year. And it should be available at all online bookstores. And of course, would love to hear from you, and reviews on the book would be amazing. I obviously learning and growing in leadership as well. And I'm sure I have blind spots like everybody else. And of course, like we talked earlier, my own biases. So please voice your opinions. And they can get a hold of me on LinkedIn, just Maria Brink, BRINCK, or on my website, Zynergy International. And I'd be more than excited to continue this conversation with each and single one of you.
Fabulous. So we'll put all of those links in the show notes for everybody, so you've got those. So Maria, thank you so much. I have so loved this conversation. I love it when I can geek out with somebody who's on the same page as me about what we need to do in business. It's super, super exciting. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, and hopefully we can catch up with you maybe sometime in the future and continue the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Julia, for having me on here and inviting me to your amazing podcast. Thank you. Thank you.
No, thank you. So everyone, until next week, love you to reflect on some of the things that we've been talking about today. Lots and lots of different topics, and we'll catch you next week. Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Impactful Teamwork podcast. Please stay tuned for future episodes and do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on your favorite platform. Recommendations are essential for attracting new listeners. Please follow us on social media at Julia Felton and at Business Horsepower. And if there are any topics you'd like us to cover on future episodes, please do let me know. Remember, you and your team are always making an impact. What impact will you make today?